the area of real estate in the last 5 to 10 years has just become rife with criminal elements trying to perpetrate fraud in some part of a real estate transaction. I always tell folks whenever I have an opportunity to speak in person, pick up the phone, Google, get a verified number, call them and verify the wiring instructions by phone before you send it.
Well, Jeff Parmer, welcome to the Beyond Wealth podcast. It only took me like 6 years to get you on here.
Now, it wasn't that bad,
No. But you are a busy man. You are a closing attorney here in Birmingham,
yes.
And you do primarily a significant amount of my closings. I've worked with you for a long time.
Yes.
One thing I appreciate about you and your team is we, in the spaces, that I do closings in different properties, some of them just have unique circumstances. Some of them go in and out of contract several times, and you guys are always patient, always great to communicate, always great in solving some of those nuanced problems. So I appreciate our working relationship, and I'm so grateful that you would jump on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm glad that we made it happen. I'm looking forward to spending a few minutes with you.
Yeah, we'll be, and then back to the work. Right?
There you go.
On an average day, how many closings do you do on a busy day that kind of gets booked up?
Probably average between 8 and 10 closings a day on every weekday during the month. Now, some days are busier, some days are less.
Right.
That includes the transactions that actually close in our office, where everybody's coming in, as well as the ones that are being handled, where one of the parties is closing remotely. So,
yeah, and we do a lot of mail-aways, right? I mean, sometimes we do mail-aways where both parties are not even showing up to the table.
There was a fair number prior to COVID, but during COVID, it, of course, just exponentially increased the number of folks that either aren't able to come to closing, weren't able to come to closing, are out of town and can't come into the office for closing. So, there's a significant number of remote closings now.
So talk me through how you got in the space of doing a lot of law, and then ultimately, doing more real estate law, and transactions and stuff like that. Tell me a little bit about your journey.
Yep. So I graduated from Auburn undergrad, went to Alabama to law school. So
little cross pollination there.
Exactly,
that's a bold move.
Exactly. I have been practicing in Birmingham for 32 years. The first part of that time I did defended insurance companies in claims against policyholders and so forth, and kind of transitioned into the real estate world about almost 25 years ago, and have pretty much worked exclusively in that area for these last years. And it's a very interesting area to me. It always was, and It's a good nexus to me of the law and the people, So we get to work with a lot of interesting folks like you and other agents and property owners and so forth. And it's just I enjoy it. I do. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you, in these closings, obviously there's some that go smoothly and stuff like that. But there's other ones where you're the transaction part of it, but people are kind of like, hey, what about this advice or different things? How much are you kind of diving into like, hey, I'll give you some direction, but ultimately I can't represent you as a lawyer for this transaction, because you are the functioning mediator.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so on a transaction, other states are a little different. Some have, a buyer's attorney, a seller's attorney, and a title company or closing attorney. So there's actually 3 folks involved. And of course, in Alabama, any party can have their own attorney to represent them in a transaction. Typically, though, there is just one closing attorney or title company that, kind of handles closing the transaction. That person is not the attorney for either the buyer or the seller in the transaction, and as you said, can't give specific legal advice to either one if they're in a dispute with each other. The parties would have to get their own attorneys for that. course, we do provide, general guidance about, here's what the Alabama law says. Here's how things have gone in the past. That sort of thing.
You could try to sue, but it's probably not going to work out.
Right. So, I feel like that's part of what we are hired to do is kind of help folks, get to a resolution if they are in a dispute about a transaction, and if they can. And if not, then they can litigate with each other and get to the finish line that way.
Because, in a lot of these transactions, there is a certain amount of money passing for closing fees, for lending, for maybe repairs done on the property.
Right.
Typically, because of the lending factor, we're not talking about $500,000 of these fees and these things to be disputed. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it's better to kind of figure that out at the closing table, because if it didn't and you had to do it afterwards or whatever, you're talking about small claims court and probably not even close to being worth claiming in small claims court.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. A lot of the time in the residential closing world, it's a lot of money to the parties involved, for sure.
Yeah.
But not a lot of money if you're comparing it to the sale of an office building or a shopping center or something like that. Yeah. And so I do find that most of the time, there are rare instances where there has gotten to be they're so crossways with each other that they do not get to the finish line, and they either agree to terminate an agreement, contract, and not close, or work out some other resolution short of closing. But I would say the majority of the time, the individuals through their agents typically are able to negotiate some sort of resolution to whatever issue it is that they've got.
Yeah, I've had several sellers just be like, it's $500. Let's get the deal done, or for whatever. Sure. It's like we can hem and haw about who's right, and it's like sometimes you can be so right but so wrong in a situation. It's like, what is all of our objective in this? The thing is to get this transaction done. You get the house, I get the money. Why are we qualming over these amounts? But do you do? I honestly didn't think about this. How much commercial closings do you do?
Well, by volume of transactions, probably 10%, just because the number of commercial transactions is far fewer than residential. But yes, we do commercial work as well.
I'm assuming that process, because the deals take longer to put together, they're higher money typically.
Yes.
There's a little bit more paperwork and a little bit more due diligence in that process.
And most of the time in those transactions, you do have an attorney representing the seller, an attorney representing the buyer, and sometimes the bank will have its own attorney, and
really?
There'll be a closing or escrow agent. So there can be multiple parties and attorneys involved in those transactions, depending again on the value of the transaction.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. I know you guys are doing well. You expanded some of the office space, right?
We did. The years of 2020, 2021, and through probably the first half of 2022 were off the chain.
Yeah.
They were for everybody in our industry. Rates were, as you know, historically low. We were closing, feels like 24/7.
Wow.
So we couldn't hire enough people really during that period. Of course, when interest rates started inching up, the volume starts coming down. So we have lost a few staff members mostly through attrition. I feel like we're staffed at a good level at this point.
Yeah.
I
was talking with Keith Stewart on or Kent Stewart, on with Rely.
Right.
And he was saying, it's good when the rates go up because eventually they'll pop back down to a degree.
Right.
We're not sure when.
Yes.
But then the refis come back.
That's right.
And you obviously are part of those.
Yes.
So on those transactions on the refi, is that a lesser amount of work and cost to do a refi, paperwork and all that kind of stuff?
Less work, less cost.
Yeah.
There's, of course, only two parties involved on a refinance, the borrower and the bank.
Yeah.
The borrower already has title to the property unless there's a title issue with it that would need to be straightened out, which typically there's not.
Yeah.
You're just basically getting a loan package from a lender, signing the loan documents, get them recorded, and you're done. So
makes it smooth. You're like, more refis.
Yes. The refis, in addition to the sale volume being high during those years that we talked about, the refi volume was extremely high as well.
Yeah.
Of course, once the interest rates start going up, the refis just exponentially, or I guess sequentially come down.
Yeah.
About the same amount. I mean, we are now we might have a refi a week at this point, and most of those are situations where somebody's needing to pull equity out of their house for some reason, or there's a divorce, one party's got to refinance out the mortgage and that sort of thing.
So talk me through, obviously you do a significant amount of business. You saw everything through COVID. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. What's your pulse on the market now? What are you seeing coming through? Are you seeing more FHA loans? Are you seeing conventional still pretty strong? Are you seeing alternative mortgage packages? Real estate's still moving, just at a different pace.
Yes.
And what is your pulse on kind of the current market? Because April's a pretty significant closing month. So is May, and so you're kind of in the thick of the prime season. So what's happening?
So as far as our office goes, we were extremely busy during the month of April. It was a very busy month. May has been busy so far. We have a lot of transactions that are pending to close, between now and the end of the month. I would say that it's certainly busier than it was last year this time for this period. I think part of that has to do with the fact that folks still need to buy houses and are having to come to the realization that interest rates will eventually come down. We don't know when. And we just need to go ahead and do this transaction and possibly refinance into a lower rate at some point in the future when the rates do come down. As you know, you can 5 days a week read a different article on someone else's take about what interest rates are going to do and when.
Right.
I think everyone would like to think. I think most folks thought we would have a Fed rate cut by this point in the year.
Yeah.
That obviously hasn't happened, and
it was interesting.
Not on the horizon.
Yeah, it's not on the horizon. And when that Fed meeting happened, and it didn't go the way people thought or wanted to or were projecting, there was a pullback in activity for like 2 weeks. And I will say it is 100% mental.
Oh, for sure.
100% mental. People are like, oh, we didn't get the rate. Well, let's just figure out what our new world looks like.
Right.
And then it's like, well, we still got to move, or we still got, like you said. It's a lot of mental game.
It is. And, we as a population kind of got spoiled to interest rates in the threes.
Yeah.
And, once you have that, you don't want it to go away.
Right.
And when it does, you change your behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that's what has happened. But, if you look at it on a long-term basis, and you've seen these comparisons on the internet, I'm sure I have as well, but, where we are with interest rates right now, historically, is not a terrible spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It isn't. So
it's just the reset, I mean, even I was talking with some guys who do construction and the tile guy. When COVID hit, his rates got bumped up because of supply and demand, and just they got super busy. And so, when he was used to making $30 an hour and now he's making $40 an hour, it's very hard for him to go back to the mindset of like $30 an hour or 35.
Right.
He's like, no, I make 40 an hour.
Yes.
And it's like, well, the supply and demand. So that's kind of trying to work its way out in the system. Yeah. But I think in general too, with people, like you said, my buddy got 3%.
Right.
My buddy's sitting on 2.5% on a 30 mortgage, and he's, we're in the backyard drinking beers and talking about your mortgage rate, and I got to get it to 8. Like,
exactly.
I mean, how do I make that call? And it's just, it's a very mental game. But you're right. I think, real estate still needs to move. People need to move.
Yeah.
Are you seeing? I know that I saw in the fall, especially, and I'm curious as to what you're seeing now. I saw a lot of grant money,
Yes,
funding transactions a lot in last year. Is that still happening a significant amount?
Okay. It is, and I don't know all the details of the programs. I mean, obviously, a loan originator
There's several
would
out
know
there.
all that, but we've seen a lot of transactions come through with grant money, and I think that's a really fantastic way for folks to get into a property and kind of help offset the impact of these higher rates.
Yeah.
We've seen, of course, there have been some rate buy down agreements too,
Correct.
which are something that happens when rates go up. So there's that. A lot of FHA loans, a lot of VA loans, still plenty of conventional, but I would say probably the majority of the transactions that we're closing right now are either FHA or VA.
It's interesting because you're getting a little bit, rate advantage if you are in certain credit score
Right.
with the FHA. So it's interesting you're saying that. But I think it's giving this slow pullback is giving VA and FHA buyers an opportunity to actually win houses.
Yes.
Because when the rates get really low, the conventional, people who typically are in the conventional space, they kind of ramp up and push out, and then shoot. I mean, the cash is like even worse, but so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Grant money, FHA, VA. I'm doing one right now that's a VA loan.
Yeah.
We're selling it. Should close in another week, but I'm all for those opportunities for different home buyers.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
that's an interesting pulse on that specifically.
A lot of cash buyers too, though, as you mentioned just now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's dramatically increased.
In the over 500K.
Yes.
What rough idea? How much are those going cash?
Percentage wise?
Yeah, I mean just a rough, percentage.
I would say 10%.
Okay.
Which doesn't sound like a big number, but
That's a lot of cash.
it is a lot of cash. And I think a lot of folks who maybe are at the point in their lives where they're trying to downsize, it's a perfect opportunity for them if they can take the equity out of a house, buy a new house with cash, because they're really, depending on the area of town that they're in, they're probably at the near the top of the market as far as their sales price goes.
Yeah.
So, it's a good opportunity for those folks.
Yeah, it's interesting. So sub 500K, would you say that percentage is about 10% too, or is it
Probably
climb
a little
bit
more. Probably
Yeah.
a little more. Maybe bump it up to 15% on that. Yeah.
There's been a few homes that I've sold where it's interesting because you feel it's parents of the, whether it's for a college student or different
Right.
situations, they're like, yep, here's the cash, just
Yes.
front it. And they're almost treat it like a rental,
Yes.
but for their kid.
Exactly.
And their plan is to keep it. And after the kid graduates, UAB, Sanford, wherever it is, they keep it on as
Exactly.
a rental. So
It's a very good plan.
I will say I think that is actually one of my plans is when my boys go to college
Sure.
to basically buy them a place.
Yeah.
They will become my tenant and
Yes.
I'm not sure how I work it out. I may bring them into the business of it and them find other
Absolutely.
occupy with other guys
Sure.
and then basically become the landlord,
Be an excellent way to handle it.
4 years. Because if you look at 4 years of paying
Yeah.
rent, it totally makes sense. I mean,
for sure.
that's a long
Yeah.
stint to be in a property.
It is. It is. Yeah.
So let's talk about, I want to pivot,
Sure.
Birmingham specifics to closings.
Okay.
We do a lot of transactions. Some of them have had to pivot in some of the ways, we
Yes.
work. Let's specifically talk about the fraud issue we do a decent amount of mail away closings.
Right.
And, I would say, I guess it was probably a year ago, 2 years ago. I can't remember exact date, but I was seeing this hey, required
Right.
mail away mobile notary
Right.
fee. And I was like,
Yes.
where is this coming from? And
Yes.
you're like, so my understanding is the title companies have said, hey, there's so much fraud happening.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a mobile notary who's certified, take the paperwork, get the mail away person to
Right.
sign it and send it back.
Yes.
Talk about how that's kind of come about and how pretty much all the closing attorneys in Birmingham, and I'm assuming this kind of happened in nationwide, and how it's becoming an issue.
Right. Yeah. So I'll start by saying, as everybody watching or listening to this podcast probably knows, the area of real estate in the last 5 to 10 years has just become rife with criminal elements trying to perpetrate fraud in some part of a real estate transaction. It can be through wire fraud attempts. It can be through impersonation attempts where somebody's trying to impersonate a seller of a property.
I've heard about that.
yeah.
Like they'll literally, like especially it happens at lots.
Yes.
Like land
Vacant
lots.
property.
Fake,
Right.
fake. They own that
Yeah.
lot and try to sell it.
Yes, exactly. It's
I'm like,
crazy.
how do people
I know.
even?
I know. You come back to that old thought that if folks spent 10% of the time that they spent hatching this plan on something productive,
We'd have a lot better world.
Yeah, but at any rate, that's not the way it works. But to try to combat some of the fraud, especially the impersonation of seller issue, the title underwriters that we write for, and we write for the 4 major title underwriters and a couple of other regional underwriters, pretty much all of them have sent out a mandate that says, okay, if you're not, you being the closing attorney, you're not having these folks into your office to witness their signature on the documents, we're going to require you to have a vetted mobile notary service take the documents to the signer, witness their signature, send the documents back to you. Before that, we would have just sent the documents to the seller by email. Here, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller, print your document single-sided, sign in blue ink, have your signatures notarized. Here's FedEx label, send them back to us.
Yeah.
And we would go with that. But like I said, what was happening, knock on wood, did not happen in our office, but has happened in other instances that I'm aware of.
Lesser attorneys, no,
Well, that is certainly not what I'm saying. Because,
no. I mean, it just happens.
yeah,
It's almost like a roll of the dice.
It does.
And you get that fraud case on
That's
your
exactly
docket.
right. And there's the first fraud of any kind that slips through.
Yeah.
That doesn't get caught. The ones after that you catch.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, you haven't had it, so I'm taking you to Vegas because you're lucky. So.
Yeah, lucky is right. So, but the mobile notary service at least provides a level of assurance that a warm body has asked for an ID from a person, match the ID to the person, have them sign the documents, send them back to us. And that has, I think, cut down on some of the opportunity for fraud in the real estate context.
Do you think it's a significant amount, or it's still they're still finding ways, but
they are still finding ways, and
but it's helped.
It has helped. Yeah, I think that step helped. I think also there have been other tools that we and other closing attorneys I know and title companies in the Birmingham area use to verify wiring instructions. That was the other huge area for fraud in real estate. Typically the way that would work, one of the parties in the transaction would have a free email account, Gmail, Yahoo, AOL. Do you remember AOL?
Oh, yeah.
But those are sometimes easier to hack for fraudsters. They would hack into the email and intercept either the email coming to the party involved in the transaction asking for money to be wired, or intercept their instructions to our office about where to send proceeds. So there are now portals that are used to exchange the wiring information and services that that you subscribe to that verify wiring instructions as being an account that belongs to who it says it is supposed to belong to. So that's helped a lot as well.
Yeah.
In that area.
Yeah, and I've always said, like, with the wire thing too, like, you can always make a call.
Yes.
You can double check. But
sure.
if there is no portal provided,
Yeah.
but at this point, I would say that if you're sending wire instructions or getting them, and there is no verifiable portal security verification, you need to kind of ask for it.
Well, you do, and I always tell folks whenever I have an opportunity to speak, either in person to agents or what have you, or in a forum like this, pick up the phone, Google, get a verified number.
Yes.
That you have satisfied yourself is the number for the person that you're supposed to be sending the money to. Call them and verify the wiring instructions by phone before you send it. Just one more level of protection to make sure the money's being sent where you think it's being sent. So.
I always get so nervous with the wires. I'm like, let's repeat this a third, fourth time.
Yes, exactly.
Because once it's gone, it's gone. I mean,
there's a lot of sweaty palms around the wire sector still. But the reason, as we've talked about before, wires are they're intended to be permanent and irrevocable. You can ask for a wire to be returned, but if the person on the other end does not want to send it back, they don't have to.
Yeah.
If it was fraudulent, of course, there are mechanisms that you can use to try to get the money back through your bank and the Treasury Department and so forth. But,
just try to eliminate it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was talking with a buddy yesterday. We were talking because he played in the space of cybersecurity insurance.
Yes.
And I thought it was interesting. He basically said there was a whitelist and a blacklist of people who would, get data, and the ones who would return the data after the ransom and the ones who wouldn't. And these companies literally know. Like, there's so much of this happening that they have people on a list of, like, go ahead and pay Bob.
Right.
Because we've worked with them before. Almost like it's a business transaction.
Yes, exactly.
But that's how prevalent, I think, with all of the advancements of digital realm, which is, we've seen that kind of in our age of growing up. Like, I had a pager when I first started, like my life early on, That was how my parents got a hold of me.
Cool too.
Yeah, I was more than cool, Jeff, more than cool. But now, like, I have a mini computer in my pocket.
Exactly.
And I've seen the transpire of that revolution.
Right.
And with all of the convenience, there is, like you said, there's always going to be a sub-criminal, fraudulent thing that we just always have to protect for.
That's right.
And verifying, trust but verify.
Exactly.
Comes
Very
back
well
to
put.
trust but verify.
Very well put.
And same thing with, like, we'll go back to talking about the closing process. Talk me through some, because I always look over my statements, the closing disclosure statement. And it kind of runs the numbers, who's paying for what, where all that. And I would say that just because everything's been pre-communicated, I would say I probably give feedback on, like, hey, we're off on this number.
Exactly.
Probably about 25% of the time. No fault to the attorney, no fault to the lender, no fault to anyone besides all of these emails are pinging back and forth. And there was just a missed email or a missed...
for sure. And a lot of the time there will be addendums to contracts that the parties signed, but for whatever reason didn't make it to our office or whatever, and need to be added.
You'll be like, nice to know, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks on the even
There's
closing.
also the issue of the real estate commission, and I know there's been a lot of debate about that in past weeks and months, but
really?
Haven't heard that.
Haven't heard.
Some areas put the percentage of the real estate commission in the sales contract. Like in Birmingham, even commercial contracts have the percentage of the commission in the commercial real estate contract. Not so for the residential. Don't know why. Would be very helpful if it did. So we have to rely on the agents to tell us, okay, here's what the commission is and here's how it's split. And I would say probably the majority of changes that have to be made to settlement statements are, errors on the commission percentages or the division of the commission between listing and selling sides. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that happen. I will say this about that. It happens because the agents are tuning into what they get paid. But I guarantee you, if they were as diligent as they were about their own commission as they are about the rest of that CD, I guarantee there would be more errors found in other pockets. And I'm not saying they don't.
Yeah.
And that is a common thing too, like I said, getting miscommunicated. But that is that's one of the things that I bring as an agent, because I look at so many of those, the volume I do.
Right.
I can go through them real quick, and
Sure.
I can spot, we're
See
off
what's-
right
yeah.
here real
Yeah.
quick. So
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of that. I mean, I've gotten over the course of, my career in 2.5 years, I've gotten thousands of dollars attributed back to my clients because of just like, hey, the CD is off.
Right.
Let's make sure to correct
Sure.
this number.
Yeah.
And honestly, the clients sometimes are just happy to close, and they're
Yeah.
like, oh, the numbers are good. I trust everybody.
Right.
And they don't do their due diligence, which is
Exactly.
ultimately their responsibility. Don't get
Right.
me wrong, but I see it as mine ultimately to
Well,
help
it does
them.
help to have an agent that is experienced in looking at a closing statement, because they're a mathematical, document for all intents and purposes. And, there are different versions. There's the CD, there's the Alta closing statement, there's the old HUD one.
Yes.
So, the dollars can be set out lots of different ways, and
Can
it
we
always
talk
helps
about that?
to have an agent to look at it. Yes.
Can you all get into like a room and just decide to be on one? Because I like the way you guys lay out your closing statement, but there's other ones I'm like, because I don't look at it as often,
Right.
it takes me a little bit longer to like process through it, and I'm like, why can't they all just be the same?
Oh, could be the case.
Yeah.
Because if you look back to when we first started in real estate 20 years ago, we had a HUD. It was called HUD.
Right.
HUD 1 settlement statement. And there was, everybody knew what the HUD 1 was, where all the lines were, the line numbers even, what went on each line number.
Yes.
And then
Sounds like a great world.
yes, it was a nice world. And then, of course, the CD, closing disclosure, was promulgated by the CFPB, which occurred after the 2008 mortgage meltdown in an attempt to provide a greater level of information and protection to buyers in residential transactions. And the CD itself, we've all grown accustomed to it. We know where things go on it, but it is primarily a buyer document. So the American Land Title Association, when the CD came out, said, oh, we're going to put forth the Alta settlement statement, which will be same numbers that are on the CD, but set out in a different format, yet again, that allows buyers and sellers' numbers to all be on the same document and same lines and show debits and credits and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we landed, we meaning pretty much everyone that works in title and closing, landed several years ago, was to have a buyer CD, a seller CD, and an Alta combined settlement statement. So that's kind of where we are.
But not everyone does those. I've been to some that they don't issue that, and that's why I'm like, am I just looking at the wrong statement? I need to ask for the other one, basically?
Well, there may be some offices that don't do a combined Alta settlement statement. It's not required, but I think it's a good tool to be able to let everyone have transparency about all the numbers and,
and to cross-reference, it's easier. I mean, and that's the Alta, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's the one I prefer to look at.
Yes.
Okay, so Birmingham, let's keep on
Yes.
this train of Birmingham
Sure,
specific
sure.
issues with closing or
Yeah.
Birmingham Waterworks.
Yes.
I would say this started, when would you say it started? Probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even further than that,
So
where letters were taking really long to get back.
just pulling the lens back a notch on letters. And when you say letters, we're referring to assessment letters.
Correct,
Have
yeah.
to be ordered by the title company or closing attorney in preparation for closing the sale of the property. Birmingham is a relatively unique market in that we have the city of Birmingham proper, and then we have 40 little municipalities within the greater Birmingham metropolitan area that all have their own unique city governments. Then there are properties that are not in any city that are in unincorporated parts of the county, which have fire dues and that sort of thing that require assessment letters as well. So I say all that to say that, in our market, the typical custom is we would order a letter from the city in which the property is located, the sewer office, and then if the property is in an unincorporated part of the county, also a letter from the fire district that provides fire coverage. Those letters are ordered because those entities typically have the ability to place a lien on a property if there are outstanding charges that have not been paid. So we order the letters in preparation for closing. Some cities are extremely quick at getting letters back to us. Some take longer. Every city has its own process for ordering these letters. Some have an online portal. Some you have to mail a check. They mail the letter back to you. It's just kind of depends on what their procedure is. So we order the letters, and we typically need about 2 weeks to get the letters in from the time we order them until the time they're all in. For properties that are located in the city of Birmingham itself, we would order a letter from the sewer office. Those, again, usually take around 14 days. If there's nothing owed, we can get them instantly, but if there is something owed, it takes about 14 days to get the letter. City of Birmingham had, unfortunately, an attack of some kind on their computer system. I don't know what kind of attack it was. I've heard there are lots of rumors out, and I certainly don't want to be fomenting rumors, but there's no doubt that their computer system has been unavailable since around the second week of March for processing of assessment letters.
Yeah.
There was a period of time where we could still order the letter on the online portal, hoping to receive it at some point in the future. Several weeks ago, they turned off the portal. We can't even order letters from them any longer. I spoke, as a matter of fact, this morning with a lady who is kind of head of the assessment letter part of the city of Birmingham, and she tells us that they are diligently working to get their systems back up. They anticipate having them back up soon, and as soon as they do, they'll reopen the portal for us to go back and reorder letters and get those letters in. What we've been doing, and most of the other closing attorneys and title companies in our market have been doing the last few weeks, has been holding an escrow from closing from the seller's proceeds until we get that City of Birmingham assessment letter. Then when that letter comes in, we would release the escrow back to the seller.
Yeah.
So that's the way we've been able to continue closing the sale of properties in Birmingham. Otherwise, we would not be able to close them at all until we could get a letter like that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a little bit, maybe more information than you wanted about all that. But
No, I think it's a good breakdown. And to be honest, that is a lever that I've used in lots of different situations for a property to get closed. Sometimes you have to make an adjustment, and you can say, hey, we may need to figure this part out, whether it's repairs or, like you said, an assessment letter, just different nuances.
Right.
When we're not talking about, a significant amount of money in the scheme of stopping a transaction happening. And you can just say, hey, let's escrow that. We'll figure out this portion of the discrepancy later.
Yeah.
But let's move forward with signing. And I've done that several times,
Sure.
not just with this, with
Yeah.
Birmingham Waterworks and different things like
Yeah.
that, assessment letters.
Yeah.
So, but even before this whole
Mm-hmm.
March thing, we were still doing the assessment letters because sometimes those those escrows, because they still were not sometimes happening quick
Correct.
enough, or like on a cash transaction,
Yeah.
which typically closes, if everybody's on board, can close within like 2 weeks,
Sure.
sometimes even shorter.
Of course.
You're not getting a letter in that time.
That's right.
And so even if they try,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, that varying of like letters taking
Yeah.
just different times. So.
That really is probably even before the city of Birmingham's issue with their computer system was probably one of the biggest sources of frustration, not just to our office, but to anybody that works in the area of title and closing, was getting these assessment letters in and, taking 2 and 3 weeks to get them in and not having them, and everybody's ready to close.
Yeah.
So there were times even before the city of Birmingham's computer issues that we were having to hold money in escrow. The only difference there is we would get the letter within 1 or 2 weeks after closing, get the money dispersed, and everything moves along. That
Yeah.
has just taken a lot longer now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but with this assessment, so if you have a tenant occupied property,
Yes.
there was a time when you as the property owner, if they were not paying their water bill,
Mm-hmm.
there was a time when that debt or that lien would go on the property owner.
Correct.
Laws have changed,
That's right.
and what you have to do, the lien still has to be cleared, but what
That's
you can
right.
do is basically show your lease
Yes.
for those dates. What was that date? Remind me.
That's a good question. I don't know.
I feel like it was in 08. I could be wrong, but I
It
feel
may
like
have
it was
been longer ago than that. I'm not
maybe
sure. I
06,
would
but-
have to go back and check when that act passed. But basically, it was an act that dealt with the Jefferson County Sewer Board that said, as you just pointed out, sewer charges incurred by a tenant, as long as there was a lease in place, providing that the tenant paid their own water and sewer bills, would prevent the sewer office from being able to collect those bills from the property owner. To set that mechanism in place, you do have to put a copy of the lease on file in the sewer office.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you do that, the sewer office can send a compliance letter. It's basically a letter that says, yes, there are these charges, but they were incurred by a tenant, so they don't have to be collected.
Yeah.
And that is our process. The sewer office, there's no issue right now getting letters from them.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, we can get letters almost immediately on properties that do not have any charges. If there are charges, it can take 2 weeks or so to get the letter in.
Yeah.
And then we can talk to the property owner about whether, there are 3 liens, 3 different people's names here.
Yeah.
Were any of these tenants? And if so, you might want to put your lease on file in the sewer office. Anyway, yeah.
I did a off-market deal, one of my properties a while ago, where there was like $3,000 of like backed, and the seller had like the paperwork, but they had to get it in, and I was just like, well, let's just escrow it. And she, which is fine, it was under what she wanted, but she's like, no, I want to get this cleared, I want to get it
Yes.
figured out. And so it delayed the closing by like a month and a half,
Yeah.
because they even had to get lawyers involved, because Birmingham Waterworks the super company was pushing back, and it was a fiasco. But it typically does not happen, but I mean, I've seen these things pop up on 5% of properties, and they'll make a shift in the whole closing that
Yes.
kind of gets a little
It can
awry.
be an issue to be worked through for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any other aspect of the closing process that is unique to Birmingham, or issues you have to work through often? Just given the lay of how real estate moves here in Birmingham.
I really can't think of anything other than, as I said, the assessment letter issue that's really much different for the Birmingham area as opposed to either other parts of Alabama or other parts of the country for that matter. Basically it's send us a contract, we'll start the title work, title commitment comes back, shows us, that the seller has clear title, has a mortgage, has other title issues that might need to be cleared. Lender is in the background working on the buyer's part, getting it ready to close if there's a loan involved. And we're all working toward a closing date, at which time either everybody's going to come into the office and sign documents, or we're going to set up a mobile notary for parties that can't come into the office and go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Business as usual. Just not as many refis.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Well, this conversation has been very helpful, and I think we dived into a little bit of those, like I said, those nuances of why things delay. Like I found more insight onto why we're seeing those, because we have I have a client right now. We have 2 escrows out, and they actually have a 1031 they're trying to move money into. So there's a timeline for that, and I'm like, hey, why are we at where we're at? And that's the reason. And so it's good to know. Now I can communicate with him. So having a pulse on these fraud issues or these letter issues or just the nuances as an agent is always helpful,
right?
Because then we can communicate. And I think the more I can communicate, the better everybody understands and has grace for these delays. Basically,
I think that's definitely fair to say. I know from personal experience, most folks are, when you explain the process and the fact that the letters that we're waiting on, we've requested, it's outside of our control as to when we get them. We want to close your transaction. Here's what we have to do to be able to close it. Most folks are extremely patient and reasonable about that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the time. If someone wants to work with you, get a hold of your office, do a transaction there, close a house or 2, or a commercial, how do they get a hold of you and reach out to your office?
You can call our office, 205-871-1440. You can email me. My email address is the letter J, and then Parmer, Parmer, at parmerlaw, parmerlaw.com. We'll get back to you. We'd love to work with any and everyone.
Love it, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all the business we get to do together.
We need to do it again.
Right.
I'll have you on my podcast.
Yeah, right? I love it. All right. Take it easy, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much.